huge thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
being able to model to my kids that actually, right, I think for me in the early days, suddenly. Good evening and welcome to our weekly Insta Live. I'm Ellen, for those of you that don't know, founder of Sobriety, Sisterhood, and I am going to get beautiful Sarah in to join us. And tonight we're going to be talking about parenting. Has on the way that we parent, on the way that children see us when we're drinking, how they navigate their own journey with alcohol, repair work with repair work with children when we're maybe when we not so pleased with how we behave when we're drinking. I'm hoping that Sarah is joining. Oh, I think somebody's there. So feel free to ask any questions that you might have. We are doing, yes, parenting in sobriety tonight. Let's see where Sarah is. Oh, there she is. So any of you that have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat and we will be answering them. If you would like us to talk about anything else as well next week, then by all means, drop us a message and we will answer your questions, or we'll talk about a different subject. And you can see these videos, they'll be coming up on YouTube channel as well. Where is hold on, I'm not doing very well here. Oh, I don't know what's going on with my phone. Bear with us and we'll get. Okay. Mm-hmm. That should have Sarah joining us. This comes from me being really tired after trauma with my hamster last night, my daughter's hamster, being attacked by our cat. So let's see, why can't I get Sarah to join? I can see a cable. I'm hoping that is Sarah the wrong way around. There we are. Here we are.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are
Good,
you?
yeah, good. Thank you. My phone didn't want you to join.
No, honestly, it kept saying your request has not been sent.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't talk on my own for now. Oh, for however long. How's your week been?
Great, thanks.
Good.
Good. Funny.
Funny. Interesting. How are you enjoying your sobriety at the moment?
Excellently.
Yeah.
I went to the pub for a game of pool last night, and I did an hour and a half, and I finally escaped when a gentleman began to tell me in his very drunken way about his treatment for his toe fungus
Nice.
in great detail. And I just thought, I'm just going to go.
Yeah.
Why am I sitting here listening to this?
Yeah.
I'm just going to go. See ya. Bye.
Okay, that is the time to bail out. It's interesting, isn't it, actually? Again, this is probably another subject to cover, is that socializing when we're not drinking. I don't know about you. There's sometimes I really like being in that pub environment and that bar environment until, I always say it's like the third drink for people. Once people have the third drink, I'm like, yeah, no, actually, I realised how boring I probably was and how in my like other people's personal space and repetitive, and it just doesn't. I'm like, yeah, no, it's good to go. That's why it's always good to have an escape plan, right?
I spoke out loud and I was like, oh my God, this is dire. And I didn't know I'd said it out loud, but I had.
Okay, good.
And someone said to me, what does dire mean? And I was like, it means shit.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I love it when you're like navigating it with this clear mind. And I don't know about you, but I always have this narrative in my head of, oh, this is interesting. Like, why am I feeling like this, or how do I feel, or this? Why am I staying here? When yeah, all of a
Yeah,
sudden we stopped drinking and realised that it was the alcohol that was making certain situations bearable. Right? It wasn't that they were fun because of
totally.
alcohol. They were
It
pretty
was,
shit, and we had to drink some poison. Um,
yeah.
to
And
make them
someone would
bearable.
say, drunk, they look like they've had a stroke. I'm not even joking. Do we need to get this person an ambulance?
Oh God.
It's so bad. So that was great.
You have to come and live in the sober bubble in France where I really don't see anyone pissed anymore. In fact, yeah, last year I was going out and I mean, I remember going into our nearest city and seeing people, because I do live in like, I've set my life up right for this real sober success for sobriety. I'm in my little bubble. I don't see a huge amount of pub people and all that kind of thing. And in France, it's a bit different anyway. But geez, there were people, all great atmosphere until about 10, 11 o'clock at night. And then there's people puking in their hats and like falling into people. And I was just like, this is not nice. This is why I live in my bubble. Interesting. Anyway, this week we are talking about parenting in sobriety, the impact that maybe the impact, oh, there's several kind of things here. Maybe the impact that being a parent had on your journey to give up alcohol, whether it, I don't know whether it impacted your choice at all. Um, and also what parenting looks like, how it's different when we step into sobriety. So first of all, let's talk about then, was it something that you thought about when you were drinking?
Not really.
No.
Everyone else did it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so normal, right? It's just so normal. And I mean, I've got memories of sitting in the back seat of my dad's Cortina for hours with a packet of crisps and a Panda Pop
Yeah.
because he's in the pub. It's just how it was.
Yeah.
And I mean, fortunately, I haven't done that with my own children, but certainly I've kind of taken colouring books, felt tip pens, Lego, Play-Doh, whatever else to the pub so that we can sit and have a few pints. And my kids are saying, I'm bored, I want to go home, or they're throwing Lego off the balcony at the top landing of the pub, and so and like I said last week, there were times when we would go as a group of mums with our toddlers to the park at lunchtime and take a bottle of cava or a few beers with us, or whatever, and sit on the park next to the slide and get pissed.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you say, everybody else is doing it, right? So it feels
Oh,
completely normal. I'm thinking about the questions I'm asking you, and it's like, no, my children weren't ever a consideration in me giving up alcohol.
no,
It wasn't until I gave up alcohol that I realized what a massive
totally,
impact and how different it was, and
totally,
how scary it must be for my kids to see that energy shift in adults and
totally,
being around
yeah,
drinking adults. And like we just said, the energy shift where people have had, like, in me, their safe space, their stable person who goes from this person, and after, for me, it was always like that third drink, to somebody who is quite different. And I just, again, like we've lived in a house with somebody with severe mental health issues, and I think it's that same energy shift of,
yeah,
I don't know whether I can trust this person. I don't know if I feel
yeah,
safe around this person. And being around a big group of adults must be really scary for kids, actually.
totally. And I think it's not until you stop that you realise how unavailable you are to them
Yeah,
when you're drinking. You know, um, because you're unavailable to anything else. So emotionally
yeah,
unavailable. Um, for me, like my role as a parent is changing because I've got two teenagers. So over the last kind of year and a half, I've definitely gone from being a kind of having to be in the house, sitting next to them like all the time, to someone now who kind of patrols the perimeter and just makes sure no one bad gets. You know,
Yeah.
it's that kind of it's a shift in role, um, and so it's really interesting now that I can be, you know, the weekends 10:30 at night. They'll come and sit on my bed and just start talking at me, which would not
No.
been able to happen when I was drinking.
Isn't that the
And
best
that's when they
thing?
need me.
Yeah.
It's changed.
The best thing with teenagers is that late night when they come and they sit and they like connect with you at that point, and
Totally.
being able to be, as you say, emotionally
Yeah,
available to them is something that builds your self-esteem, right? You know that you are doing things right and they can trust you. They can trust that you're
yeah,
going to be the mum that they know. And it's interesting, again, that with the people that I work with and with myself, quite often motherhood, the isolation, no one really talks about the isolation of motherhood when the kids are young, but it's that being at home with the baby, like, okay, we can't go out at night, so I'll sit and have a glass of wine or whatever beers at home. And it's almost that can be the catalyst for suddenly our social drinking has gone to drinking at home.
absolutely. Yeah,
Um,
and you have a few more drinks at the weekend. May have people over,
yeah,
and you kind of recreate your social life things within your
yeah,
house.
yeah. And
Yeah,
so it's so often that people will think in their head, well, I'm a social drinker. And then when I say, well, where do you do your drinking? Well, it's at home. And we are fed this lie of the mummy needs wine, all that kind of thing, hurrah for gin, all these people who the expectation is, oh, this is a stressful job. Now, parenting is a really stressful job, right? It is the biggest thing. I also think it's like the biggest pleasure, like one honor to be able to get
absolutely.
to do this. Which is strange because I never wanted kids. My kids know that. Um, but I love it so much. And yeah, the thought that they think we need to have a drink at the end of the day to de-stress from coping with them.
Yeah, absolutely. That they're so terrible that we have to poison ourselves
Yeah,
to handle what they're giving
yeah.
us.
I mean, I always think about that. What are we creating
What
when
message?
that's the
Yeah,
narrative that we're
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of giving?
yeah.
Um, Okay, so what change did you see when you gave up alcohol in your parenting?
I was more consistent for sure. I don't mean like consistent around rules. In you know, I think the biggest thing that I've really noticed is that without alcohol, I can totally trust
Mm-hmm.
myself. I'm consciously making decisions for myself and about things, and checking in with myself that I'm staying true to what my core values are. You know, having that mindfulness of that, and so I think for my children, they can also trust that I'm going to be consistent, human but consistent.
Yeah,
That my responses are not fueled by alcohol, either to be extra shouty or extra overjoyed. You know, it's I'm consistent. There's a level. They know where they stand without me drinking, which I don't think they did before. Because let's face it, when you're drinking and tired and
yeah,
hungover or wanting another drink, then you're not consistent. You're not on a level playing field.
no,
So I think that's the biggest difference is that they know what they're going to get.
yeah. And you touched on something there, the fatigue, right? I think for
Yeah,
me in the early days, suddenly sober sleep, I always say that was almost my driving force for continuing sobriety. I realised one impact as I was starting to take breaks. I realised that even one glass of wine was starting to impact the way that I slept. As my tolerance started to drop as I was taking breaks, I was a brilliant drinker before, so I thought, so egotistical in it. But yeah, I was really noticing the impact of alcohol on my sleep. And so that even within the first month of me suddenly sleeping better, I felt had a real impact on how I was with the kids. My mood.
definitely.
I am a grumpy old cow when I don't have enough sleep.
I'm a
Um,
bastard.
and my tolerance for the kids was very low. And right, I've got three kids. It was really yeah, it's a lot. It is hard
Busy,
work.
right?
Yeah.
Busy, yeah.
So why was I doing something that then impacted my rest and recovery
Totally.
instead of like, oh, I'll get an early night? There was so much of me that wanted to stay up when they went to bed and carry on drinking to have that me time, um, and then step back into the binge drinking, finding the old me before I had kids, and it just impacted so much the way that I
Yeah.
dealt with them. They
Yeah, I totally agree.
they didn't
Yeah.
know who they were getting at what,
Yeah. And when?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like
Totally.
when we do the work in sobriety as well, and we can look at our core values, and we can how we have that mindfulness and that space in our head to start questioning things. One of the things I used to do was rage clean on a Sunday, and the kids would get out of bed and I would be kind of slightly hungover and just really angry. By the time they got out of bed, I was rage cleaning the house. Like, nobody helps me here. I'm doing everything myself. Like, yeah,
Oh, I still do that.
my kids would be like, what the fuck is going on? We've literally just got up. And then I started to question that with the work that we do. Like, okay, what's going on with me? Why do I feel like this? What do I need to do to stop doing this? Because this isn't the
Yeah.
person that I want them
Yeah.
to see.
Yeah.
I want them to want to be able to connect with me a bit more, not be this mum that's angry and grumpy all the time. I
Yeah.
mean, I still am sometimes, but
Yeah, absolutely. And I came downstairs the other day and my son had used every glass out of the cupboard in a day. And I was like, there's 14 glasses. What are you doing?
yeah, I mean, it's still parenting. I find it interesting as well when we talk about what's the role of a parent, because that's the role that we need for ourselves as well. How can we parent in a completely different way? Um, See, I would love to do one of these with my kids at some point, because I don't know how much you talk to your kids about it. My kids, obviously, this is the whole sobriety world is around all the time. People that come to the house tend to be people I've met in the sober community. We talk about sobriety a lot, and my kids will say there's night and day difference between the way I parent, because I used to be such a kind of I set such high expectations for them, um, which is probably something that how I was brought up to. Um, and nothing was ever right, and I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
so strict with them and I was so emotionally unavailable to
yeah.
them that all of a sudden everything just completely changed, and they were like,
Mm,
we couldn't understand how
mm,
now you're willing to ask like what's going on, or that I
mm.
am much more compassionate mostly to their situation and
Yeah,
what's going on with them.
yeah. It's yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So do you talk to your boys about your sobriety? What do they know about why you've stopped drinking?
Yeah, they know pretty much the reason. I said I I was getting I didn't like it. I didn't like how often I was getting drunk, and the fact that I could never just have one beer. So they are pretty wise, really. And they often say to me, if I'm going out, are you going to have a beer? I'm like, no, I'm not. And there was an occasion when they went to my friend's house and they asked her, we'd been out together, and they asked her when I wasn't there, did my mum drink beer? She was like, no, your mum doesn't drink beer anymore. So I think, like all things like that, that we take our children along with us on this cycle of
Yeah,
change. And every time that we get off the cycle of change and go into lapse, we take them along that journey. And so I think for kids, it takes some doing for them to really believe that it's happening,
yeah,
as much as it does for us. That every time that we don't succeed in that sobriety, then we take them with us, and they feel the effects of that. I say failure, but effects of not
yeah,
succeeding. And I think if people's drinking is very problematic, of course, where they have to go somewhere else or respite care, or it leads to homelessness and stuff, that can be really damaging for children. And so I've kind of all that every time I didn't succeed, I kind of carried that kind of guilt, I guess, with me. And so I guess I've was quite guarded in what I told them at first
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't so sure that I was going to be able to do it. I'm mostly sure now, 99.9%
Yeah.
sure. But at first it was like, I'm not, I'm not making any kind of massive promises here to anybody,
Yeah.
but particularly not to my children. But that that changed, and I think as my ability to believe my mindset has shifted, which it was huge. That mindset shift was huge. And I think as I had more faith in my own ability for it to keep going, I was able then to share more with them.
Yeah.
Um, but I definitely felt quite protective of them in that getting on and off that kind of
Yeah.
cycle, and and damaging the trust
Yeah.
from the off on.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I remember so clearly having a conversation with my daughter. So my kids, I think I was trying to work it out earlier. I think they were like 5, 7, and 9 when I stopped drinking. Um, and there's a couple of things. I remember having the conversation with my daughter with her in the kitchen, or when I was with their dad, and me saying like, it just doesn't make sense to me anymore that people drink alcohol. It's a poison, um, and ultimately we are poisoning ourselves for fun, and it's not healthy. And I just decided not to drink. And I remember their dad saying, "Don't listen to your mum. Like, she's a hypocrite. She loved drinking," um, and me being like, I'm not a hypocrite. I just know different now. When I was
Yeah,
in
yeah,
it, I
absolutely.
didn't know any
Yeah,
different. Um, Another thing I remember is Oliver, who was only 5-ish when I stopped drinking. He said to me a couple of years later, "Oh, you're having mummy's medicine, aren't you?" And I was like, "What?" And he's like, isn't that mummy's medicine in your glass?" And he thought it was like beer or wine. I said, "No, no." And the kids were like, "Oliver, she's sober." And he said, "Well, I don't know what sober means." And they're like, "Well, she doesn't drink alcohol." But even at that really young age, he'd picked up that
popped it.
language
Yeah,
that and just assumed that all adults were drinking, and that belief for me is really kept me stuck for years and years and years in my
yeah,
sobriety, that just all adults drink. It's like a rite of passage thing.
yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah,
being able to model to my kids that actually it can be completely
yeah,
normal not to drink. um,
yeah,
and as I said, I love it because nearly everyone that comes to my house is sober too, and I don't have alcohol in the house anyway. But it's just like, this is normal too.
yeah, yeah. I think the last time that I drank, the day after I had the kind of last bender I had, my kids were coming home, and they came home, and it never really. I think it stuck with me because that last occasion is the occasion. Is the occasion. I'm sure they've done it before, but it didn't stick with me before. And they said to me, "It smells of beer and cigarettes in here. Did you have a party while we were at Dad's?" And I was like, "Yes." And then they were like, "Who came?" And I said, "Oh, you don't know them." And he said, "Oh, were they strangers?" I said, and I was so conscious of the fact that I was just standing there barefaced lying because there were some strangers. Yeah, there were. And I don't. And if I saw them in the street, I wouldn't recognise them.
Yeah,
And that happened all the time, scarily. But I wouldn't recognise them, and I just was so conscious of the fact that I was standing there telling a barefaced lie. Of course, they weren't strangers because that would be dangerous.
that would be really silly.
Why would anybody do that?
It is.
you know?
And that's how the mind works, though, right? The mind is protecting you all the time and confirming that actually that's fine for you. It's not fine for them, but it's fine for
Yeah,
you. You know what you're doing. You're a grown up. It's not until we stop and really are mindful of what we're doing and the unintended consequences. I'm not religious at all, really. I'm quite spiritual, but I always say it's there by the grace of God that we
absolutely.
didn't, none of our
I'm so
kids
lucky.
drowned or like,
So lucky.
or got into an accident. I remember my daughter broke her nose, and I was like, oh, the universe really looked after us because it was the one night we hadn't been drinking and we had to take her to the hospital because we live in the middle of nowhere in France. And I was like, oh, someone was really looking after us, that one night in about 6 months that we weren't over the limit. We had 3 kids at home that
Yeah.
we were responsible for,
Yeah.
and I was always slightly over the limit. I couldn't have driven them anywhere. And I look back now and just think, it's so unsafe. It was just
Yeah.
so silly. I'm
Yeah.
just so lucky that nothing happened.
Yeah. I am, yeah, so lucky in so many ways,
Yeah.
so many ways. Um, yeah.
So, how old are your kids?
25, just about, which is scary.
Yeah.
Nearly 13 and nearly 12.
So, what do you hope their relationship with alcohol will look like? And I mean, what does your daughter's relationship with alcohol look like?
She's sober.
Ah, I love that.
Hasn't always been. Um, when she was in doing her A levels, and she lived in Greece and France for a while, and she definitely wasn't sober. Definitely wasn't sober. But I think she's always responded quite badly to alcohol. Like her hangovers have always been lots of vomiting and feeling absolute dreadful. My ego said hardcore.
Yeah,
I was just very
yeah,
tolerant. I had a lot of high tolerance to alcohol. So my hangovers weren't actually that
yeah,
bad. I'd feel tired,
yeah.
but if I slept, I was fine. Whereas hers were full of vomit and yuck. So she currently is sober and has been for a long while. For a while,
Mm-hmm.
my son can't wait to have his first shot or his first party, and keeps saying to me things like, "When I'm 14, can I have my first pint?" or whatever. And I'm like, "No, you can't. No," and that's really changed
Yeah.
because I may have been more open to the suggestion that when me and my daughter used to go on holiday, she would have a small glass of wine with lemonade in it, or we used to have a little shot glass, and it would have a little bit of beer in it, or whatever. So with a meal,
Yeah.
Um, so definitely that I've become much less okay with the fact that they're going to be drinking. And last night we had a conversation about drugs. They're like, "Oh, have you ever tried this? Have you ever tried that?" And I was like, oh, I don't want to lie to you, but I certainly don't want to glamorize this. But also, I don't want you to think a drug is something and it's something else, and then you get yourself stuck into a situation. So I've really had to. I'm very liberal around drugs and alcohol, and I've really had to kind of analyze where I'm going to sit in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to become, there's nothing worse than an ex-smoker kind
Mm-hmm.
of ex-drinker. Right? I don't want to become that kind of person. But also, I won't stand by and let my children fall into the same
Yeah.
trap that I did. But I have to give them the freedom to make their own mistakes, right? I'm a parent, and that's what parenting is about. Um, so all I can do, like everything else, is give them the information, set the example, practice what I
Yeah.
preach, and and show them an alternative,
Yeah. Absolutely. It.
whilst remembering they're still young people who are probably going to make loads and loads of
Yeah.
mistakes.
It's. I find it a little scary. Of course, to my daughters are 14 and 16, and when I think back to when I was 13, I was drinking on the streets for sure,
Yeah,
and unfortunately I looked older than I was, so I was
yeah,
drinking
me
in
too. Yeah,
pubs as well,
yeah,
um, and so I love the fact that they aren't doing that. I was the same as you. When I look back now, I hate it, but it was what happened to me, right? That whole the watered down wine, the port and lemonade, like all these things I gave the kids from very young because I had this belief that cultured people And a good, healthy relationship with alcohol looked like normalizing having a little bit of wine with dinner or having a little bit of this, you know.
Won't hurt you.
Yeah. And it's like, oh,
Yeah, absolutely.
now when I think very, very kind of pragmatically about this is a poison and our bodies are not meant to deal with like working through this poison, and a child's body for sure is not meant to work through that
Definitely.
poison. I am pretty horrified and that I ever did that. And I remember celebrating New Year's Eve with our friends, and their daughter was 12, and I gave her a glass of champagne. And I remember the look on the mum's face was just like, and I was like, oh, sorry, because it didn't occur to me. I was like, she's
Yeah.
12. Geez, if anyone
Problem.
dared to give my son a glass of
Yeah,
champagne, I'd be like, what the fuck? But it is interesting of, okay, so how do we navigate this, that they are going to have their own relationship with alcohol and drugs? How open I'm really open with my kids, right? My mum hates it because I am so open. I had a period of not really drinking, and now looking back, it's because I used to smoke so much cannabis. So I went from alcohol to cannabis, like 6, 7, 8 joints a day, back to alcohol when the cannabis wasn't available when we moved here. So my reward pathway has always been skewed. I was always seeking that external kind of pleasure. So I will talk to my kids very openly about it. I talk about their uncle, and I talk about their dad. Their dad has mental health issues, and the link between that, what that means
yeah,
for them. Like,
yeah,
I'm open about it. That need to be really careful. And the information we know now is completely different to what we knew back then. We
yeah,
know that drinking under 25 is, it really, really impacts our life. How likely we are to suffer from any kind of addiction issues. We know that the brain isn't fully formed, so waiting until later is
yeah,
better. Um, there are questions with my kids that I always think, I wish somebody had asked me these things,
yeah.
because had they, it would have just got me thinking about it. So one of the questions I really like is like, how would you like your relationship with alcohol to look? Like,
Mm,
what is safe to you and what is not
mm,
safe to you?
mm.
Had somebody said that to me, I would have maybe had some parameters around my drinking. Like,
You would have thought, you would have been curious, right? You would have realised that what you see isn't necessarily how it has to
yeah.
be.
I when I think back, when I think of my 16-year-old daughter now, I remember going to a nightclub, getting really, really drunk, and walking back probably 5 miles on my own at 2 in the morning with no shoes on. Like, that was absolutely fine.
I slept in a car park.
Yeah, I mean, oh God, I just having flashbacks.
Because, and I've told my kids about when I was a student, I stripped on the bar, and there was a picture of my naked ass on the front cover of the student magazine. I know there's things that I've told my children about what I've done when I'm drunk, and this hallucination that I used to have of oh my god, that Jesus used to part his robe and pee on me.
Interesting.
And I've told my children this when had been drunk, and now they just like, yeah, but you did this, da, 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 and and I'm like, oh god, so we tell them that, but then also I say to them, do you not see how powerful alcohol is?
Yeah,
Then
yeah,
the fact that I stopped to have a pee in a car park and thought, oh, this looks like a nice, comfortable place to sleep, and slept in a car park and woke up in the
yeah.
morning.
Again,
It's like,
yeah,
it's so vulnerable, it's so
yeah,
dangerous, and I'm just like, that is how powerful alcohol is. That's the damage it
yeah,
does. That it. So I said to them, do you think I'd consider sleeping in a car park? Does that sound like a sensible thing?
yeah,
Oh, I'm so tired. Instead of getting home quickly and going to bed, I'm going to sleep in a car park. I said, do you not see how, in that moment, how damaged my
yeah,
brain was to
yeah,
make such a ridiculous decision? or that alcohol had caused so much damage that I wasn't able to make a decision, and I just fell asleep. You know, so I think it's interesting that when you have that insight and you have those fabulous experiences.
It is strange. I'm just thinking as you're talking because my kids will be like, "But it sounds so much fun." And I'm like, I'm not gonna lie, it is. Like there were times where it was really funny, and also, you know what alcohol's done to us as a family. You know what it looks like for lots of people. You know how powerful this is. Um, and yes, I'm not suggesting you don't drink because that's not my journey. That's your decision. But I'm suggesting you do it from an informed place. That
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it's all good fun until it's not fun.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you know, we don't we don't see the bits that
No,
aren't fun. No, you know, adverts for alcohol when you're. I always think of that advert. Is always in the kitchen at parties, you know, and then it's everyone looks so happy, dancing around, you know, blah blah blah. We don't see we don't see the shame, the guilt, the self-loathing, the anxiety, the vomiting, all those
yeah,
things. Those things aren't advertised, right?
no,
The,
and also
the not paying your bills, the
yeah, what's
everything else that comes with
the
it, the
domestic
impact.
violence, the amount of
Yeah,
homes that where parents aren't living together as a result of you know, not the normal, you know, the kind of stereotypical alcoholic. This is the impact that alcohol
yeah,
has. The if you look at the statistics of um, the involvement of alcohol in domestic violence,
yeah. It's
it's
huge.
huge. If you look at the statistics on youngsters being killed on the roads, that alcohol has been
Yeah,
involved. Again, absolutely huge. So this, as you said, we get fed one picture, but actually the truth is that alcohol is super destructive in so many kids' lives. Um, and by stopping
interesting.
drinking, we are making a huge impact.
Absolutely. You know, it's the fact it's so readily available, so socially acceptable, so cheap, so you know
Yeah,
all the things about alcohol,
yeah,
all of the things,
yeah.
and sober people are the ones being questioned as to why they are. God, you're so weird. Why don't you drink?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. And it's just we're the people, right? We are the ones that are breaking the cycle. We are the ones that are showing the kids now that there is a different way to do things, and that you can be these safe. It's so funny within the groups today. People were being like, "I want to be sober and cool." I was like, "There's nothing more cool than not drinking."
yeah,
To show up as your authentic self, but to be that safe person for everybody,
yeah,
to be consistent for everybody, but
yeah,
especially for your kids. And lots of people that I work with, you know, I've got clients from very young. I think my eldest client is 82, and they talk about, oh, well, I really wish I'd done this earlier for my kids. I think it's never ever too late to show your children, no matter how old they are, that you can look at something, decide that it's not for you anymore, and for them to see that you are making a change, and that's not necessarily linear, but that you're still there trying to change something that you don't like.
yeah. I mean, I get you know, I get that. Why I wish I'd done it sooner, and especially if you get to the age of
Yeah,
82, you know. And I wish I'd done it sooner. I wish I'd never started, but I wish, right?
I think that is worth an entire conversation in itself of do we wish things were different. I mean, you know me, you know that my passion is like early intervention with people. That's why for me being very openly sober and talking about it and having this narrative is so important, because people start to question their drinking before it's really destructive. But it's also really difficult, right? Because it's not super destructive, maybe we're thinking that
Exactly.
we don't need to do it. But yeah, just
And
having this narrative open.
did I think when I took my first drink at age 12 that however many years later that is, 30 whatever years later that is,
Yeah.
oh God, so old. A few years
Well,
later, um, that I would be sitting in a position where I'm saying to myself, you need to stop.
mm,
This isn't fun anymore. You need to stop. What are you doing?
yeah.
Why are you doing this? What are you benefiting? How's this benefiting you? What is the impact? Do you know what the impact is? Have you considered the impact? You know, all of those questions. But ultimately, I don't want to do this anymore. Um, did I think that? No, because I was 12.
Yeah, I'm just having flashbacks of me being 12 and my parents having put a bottle of Strongbow in the freezer, and it had all those crystals, and I remember downing when people weren't in the kitchen, me taking glugs and glugs and glugs of it, and never did I question. Oh, for good, it was interesting when we were doing our timelines in the groups this week. And I sat down and did my timeline. And actually, there was only 6 or 7 years that I really got to enjoy my drinking, because after that, I questioned it, and then it's never the same. But at that point, isn't it weird how my instinct was like, more is better, this feels really good, this feels amazing. I wasn't trying to escape anything, I wasn't trying to escape
Mm.
emotions, I was just like, this is wonderful, it tastes brilliant. Yeah,
So right.
I know, just awful. And again, had some very, very awful memories of cider that in very potentially dangerous situations.
Yeah.
um
God, the times, the evenings, I would be sat on the local park with Mad Dog 2020, Kiwi and Strawberry Mad Dog 2020, and whatever else we could find to mix into these bottles, going round and round and round and round and round about until we puked
yeah,
fluorescent bile
yeah,
all over the
merry
place.
mix.
We were like,
We used to just
oh, great
everything.
time.
Yeah, yeah. Thank goodness. I do feel people say, "Oh, I think the tides are changing with alcohol." I do hope they are. I think it's great that we have this narrative. I think it's great that we have this dialogue about it. I do think there is still an awful lot, a long way to go, and the
So
more people that can
far.
model to their children that sobriety is fucking awesome as well. This is not a
Yeah.
punishment. This is not because we did something wrong, and this is just
Yeah.
awesome. This is a normal choice for a normal, healthy adult to make.
And I'm not missing out on
I'm
anything
not
by
missing
doing
out
it.
on anything.
Not being
I'm
deprived.
no, I'm super awesome. um, we
Yes, you are.
can be super awesome. We're all super awesome for living life alcohol free. And again, this is the other thing that I'm really open with my kids about that I never used to be, is that we can go through hard emotions and uncomfortable times, and we don't need to lean on alcohol, and it's okay. When I went through the whole like stuff that I did with their dad, and they would say, "You're okay," and I was like, "I'm not, but I will be. I know that I will be." um and like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't want to pretend that we don't have emotions and that things aren't difficult sometimes. I want my kids to know that that's okay, and we
Absolutely.
don't need to numb and escape every uncomfortable emotion that comes up with alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a journey, right? It's so, and it's always been, you know, about every 2 or 3 months, I'm like, oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
So, okay, so that's what's happening now. That's okay. That's okay. I can do that. That's fine. And but the great, that, and I come back to it all the time, is this being able to have the faith that I can trust myself in any situation. I know exactly who I am, exactly how I'm going to respond, exactly what I'm about, and exactly how much I can take.
yeah,
And life still happens. Can be really tricky. What I've got the ability to do now is to be able to not shelf things until I'm able to get pissed to deal with it, but to be able to say, okay, I'm really aware and conscious that I've got this
yeah,
coming up. This is going to last 3 or 4
yeah,
months. So I know that I've got to have some
yeah,
reserves for 3 or 4 months.
yeah,
And I know that I've got to take something else or tweak here or tweak there. So I'm able to do this for 3 or 4
yeah,
months. And what would have completely overwhelmed me when drinking, because of the inability to do that, because of the lack of self-awareness, because of the lack of good mental health, and emotional health, for all those things. I'm totally able to do that
Yeah.
now. I still feel overwhelmed sometimes, but I'm able to be like, okay, I'm just gonna breathe through this little bit of panic I have now, and I know it's going to be okay,
Yeah.
because ultimately I know I can handle
Yeah.
this.
It's that power of the pause, right? I talk about it lots in the group. Power of the pause when in the early days of sobriety, when cravings hit. But the power of the pause is
Mm.
something that, as you say, when new things come up in sobriety, and they do, even like now, 6 years into it, it's like, oh, that's interesting. I sat with Helen today. We went for a long walk, and we sat overlooking this castle and river, like having jaffa cakes and tea, and me talking about a new experience, and just like there's not one time that I wish that I wanted, that I could drink, because I can if I want. I don't want to, but it was this new experience, and it's so interesting for me to do it sober. And it's
Yeah,
just being super mindful of it and putting that pause in and
yeah,
going like, what do I need in this moment? um
yeah.
why is
I
this
mean, even,
uncomfortable?
totally. I mean, old experiences and new experiences when you're sober,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's so many things that like I've never encountered as a sober
No.
person, but I've encountered loads of times as a drinking person. And it sobriety can be scary. It can be a really, really scary place, because you're like, shit, I know how drunk Sarah would have dealt with
Yeah.
this. I know how Sarah, I know how that person would have dealt with this. But I've got no
No.
clue.
And it is still like, okay, let's just avoid this, and the way that I can avoid this is by going
Yeah,
back to my old pal alcohol. And it's like, oh, okay, no, we're going to experience this sober. What does that look like for
I'm going
me?
to have an authentic
Yeah.
experience of this rather than a
Yeah.
false one, and it's so interesting. It's so interesting.
It's interesting and exciting.
Absolutely. Who are we? Who am I? Who are you without alcohol in all the facets, every layer?
Yeah.
You have to unpick every layer of yourself
Yeah.
and work out who you are sober. It's
It
fascinating.
is indeed. Okay, so yes, I hope that people have got something out of listening to us talking about sober parenting, and it is a completely different experience than parenting when drinking for those kind of reasons. Next week, what are we going to talk about next week, Sarah?
Self-limiting beliefs, Ellen.
Self-limiting beliefs. That seems like a good subject.
Well,
I love it. One of the best things, in fact, we've been talking about the stages of change as well this week on the group coaching, and we talk about preparation, how we can prepare ourselves for sobriety. And in my mind, self-limiting beliefs are the biggest thing that we can explore that can help turn around our pivot our view on what sobriety looks like for us. So it's a good
definitely.
subject. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Sarah. I will look forward to seeing you next week.
See you next
Take
week.
care. Bye, bye, bye.
Bye. Bye. Yeah. I think the last time that I